The older groups like the bottom of the barrel now.
And then if we ever want to, if it ever gets to that point where it's sports,
You good? All right, 7 o'clock. Let's call to order the February 14th, 2004 Zionsville Parks Recreation Board meeting. I'd like to thank everyone's significant others for allowing us to be here. It's on Valentine's Day, so let's go with a roll call. Vice President Ryan Cambridge. Here. Secretary Michael Kaufman. Here. Kimberly Lane.
Here.
Matt Milburn.
Here.
Chad Dilley.
Here.
And Chris Barksdale is absent today. He's out sick. So that's we have six and one absent. So next on the agenda is the approval of the January 10th, 2024 minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review it?
Yes.
Any questions or concerns? The motion to approve minutes from last month.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Ryan moves and second. So to a roll call vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Carries. Moving on to public presentations or comments. Is there anyone here that likes to talk about anything? Do we have anyone online? Okay. We will skip the foundation update since Chris is not here today. And so now we go to staff reports.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Park Board. Going to keep it brief this evening so we can keep moving on this very packed agenda. So just a couple of things of note. The Parks Department has been working with members of the Village and Cultural District and Historical Societies to place the rail trail train depot marker on the trail. So if you go by Starkey Avenue, you'll see that excavation has begun. We are looking at pouring that pad and getting that added to our community soon. But that historic marker arrived safe and sound, and it is quite impressive. So I want to thank the partnership there for installing that piece of history on our rail trail. Wanted to also provide an update of the Lions Park Connector project. So just today, I received back the survey results. If you recall, last month we began the surveying of what that easement would look like for the trail along Eagle Creek between Lions Park and Elm Street Green. So have those initial findings now. I'm going to work with the surveying company to finalize that exhibit, and then Amy Nooning to have that before you for your consideration in the near future. Also, if you walked in Elm Street Green recently, you will have seen the restoration work that took place for the contract with Tri-State Forestries that you all approved last month. So they were able to get in there, clear out the 5 acres of the Lions Park for future master planning, but also we piggybacked on that and removed just a massive amount of honeysuckle and other invasive species that were in those sections. So we've already met on site with our natural resource technician, and we're planning out what is going to go in its place. So we'll have understory plantings as well as some prairie plantings that'll go in those spaces. And finally, just wanted to let you know that the 2024 DNR LAIR grant, as well as the Indiana Department of Health Bike and Pedestrian Plan grant, have both been submitted and are under review. That's all for the superintendent.
Excellent. Director of Maintenance, Chris.
Good evening. Alrighty, so to get started, it will be pretty brief tonight, as you can kind of see. January was mostly, since the icy, snowy weather, clearing ice and snow and doing our salting ordinances for the town and the parks. We had 1.5 hours spent removing graffiti, which is pretty good. We had a few months in the cold weather where we didn't have any at all, but with the warm temperatures, it seems to be back. We had oil changes for the fleet trucks 921, 22, 88, 475, and 732. We did work with the golf course to set up, troubleshoot, and repair their water pumps out on the course to drain the excess stormwater from the, it was holes 6 and 9, I believe. We assisted recreation moving items from municipal building storage to town hall storage. Our natural resources technician began preliminary planning and reaching out for weed wrangles and volunteer events. And we met with the ARC of Boone County in preparation, continuing our partnership this summer. If you recall last year, we worked with them for about 2 months, and we ended it with that beautiful mural that's out there at Creekside. We hope to do that again this year. And then as you go down the list is really just clearing snow and salting. The big four, we salted the tunnels and bridges since those get exceptionally slick. We took down the lights at the gazebo. We cleared debris from bridges and boardwalks throughout the park system. We salted the trailhead restrooms and entrances at the new Zionsville trailhead down there on Zionsville Road. And up at the Carpenter Nature Preserve, we cleared woody debris from around the barn structures, and we labeled the buildings, and we got fire extinguishers involved to get that prepped for the fire department inspection. Last board meeting, thank you for excusing my absence, but there was a question from a board member that had about whether data can be filtered out to get a little more acuity about some things. That is possible. I did kind of include a little bit out of the report. And I am happy at any point, if you guys have any questions about that, we can meet at some time in my office, no problem. It is a really good software, and we can filter all that data through a number of categories just to get a little more idea of how it works out.
Thank you.
All righty.
And I had asked that question last time.
Yeah.
You were doing that. Do you have benchmarking data, or do we need to? Do we have benchmarking data, or do you need a little bit more time to understand what good looks like?
Yeah, I would like a little more time to set that. We're still, we've had it for about a little over a year now, and we're still kind of getting everybody in the swing of things. Just since you saw the number, we have about I think it was 3,500 work orders, so the guys do kind of get overwhelmed. If you look through what I showed you, the priority sort of things, high, medium, low. Majority of stuff that was overdue was mediums. Those are mostly inspections that are done within 24 to 48 hours afterwards. You can look at those individual work orders and you can see why something was late. We did say last year, we're looking for everybody to be over 80% on time. Ideally, I'd like to get that bumped up to 90, and I just think as we progress and we kind of streamline our operations more, we'll get there.
Okay. Thanks for dividing it out like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions or?
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your hard work. Next is Director of Recreation Services, Mindy.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So January started out with a busy year. 2024 is not disappointing in our department, that's for sure. So we had over 1,500 people walk through the Zionsville Nature Center's doors. A lot of those came during winter break, because obviously, after holidays, people were looking for things to do with their family, get them out of the house. Want to highlight a few of the programs that we did in January. One was our maple sugaring that was led by Rachel Felling. She does maple sugaring on her own property, and so she has led every year now a nice kind of a 101 overview of how to start doing that in your own property. So she had a good attendance, very positive reception on that one. We've continued our coffee and canvas through the winter months, so it's another nice thing, something a little bit unique and different for people to come on out and get some coffee and try their hand at some artwork. And then we are continuing as merit badge counselors. So both Rachel and Sierra are merit badge counselors for multiple different things, and they have been offering programming for the Scouts. So we had one in January. We have another one coming up in February as well. And then to top it all off, we did our Zionsville Puzzle Swap for the third year. About 189 people came out to Town Hall. It opened at 9 o'clock. The first people showed up at 8:15 and sat outside the door. So it's like getting Taylor Swift tickets. They were waiting to go. But we had over 1,100 puzzles were actually dropped off for the swap. To compare to that, last year we had, or the year before that, we had 656. So we routinely almost doubled every year. So we're a little worried what the fourth year might look like. So we're running out of room in our office to store puzzles. Just a few other ones that happened. So we did apply for and receive a grant through Discover Boone County for the total eclipse of the park. So that will help with that event. We also will be partnering with IU and receiving a remote intern. She actually starts tomorrow to help us with kind of coordination, marketing in different areas for that event, since it will be our biggest one for the year. Beginning of January is all trying to get as many things out to the public as possible. So you'll see we picked our 2024 events, and you've got that sitting there for you guys. Take it home, put it on your refrigerator, share it with your friends and family. But we also rolled out our sponsorship guide for the year, our summer camp guide, and then I just sent it to the printer actually this afternoon. The spring activity guide will be coming out here either the end of this week or early next week. I'll send those out. So I did print copies. If any of you afterwards want to take a look at them, feel free to pull me aside. But that's really it, unless you have any questions.
Any questions? Great work as always.
Thanks.
Golf course manager, Mike's not here, so
I can give a quick update from his report. Being the off season, we gave Mike the night off to celebrate Valentine's Day. So far, in the month of January, the golf course has already sold 22 season passes and has not sat on its laurels. They've been working to remove some dead ash trees around the course. So still staying busy even on the off season.
did the big tree get taken down?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yep.
That's it?
That's it from the golf course. Yep.
Any questions about the golf course at this time? All right, Parks Board Attorney, Amy Newton.
Sure. I've been working with Jared on reviewing some contracts and drafting MOUs and agreements and a resolution, most of which are in your new business, so I don't really have anything other than what you'll be addressing later.
Okay, very good. All right, moving on to new business, Mulberry Field Sport Use Agreements. I think we have 3 to review.
Yeah, thank you, John. So one of our priorities in recent years was to re-invite our organized sports back to Mulberry Fields. Being such a nice park with its facilities, it was meant to have that type of activity in it. And somewhere along the way after 2013, most of the teams left. So we're really proud that teams are returning to the park and beginning to utilize that space again. So before you for the 2024 seasons, we have 3 agreements for your consideration. The first is for the Zionsville Club rugby team, and that would be for 71 reservations utilizing multiple fields. And that would be based on our 2024 fee schedule, a total amount of $1,035 for the season. The second agreement is with Zionsville Little League, and that would be for 45 reservations, and that would be on the field closest to the road for a total of $225 for their season, which Little League, as you know, have outgrown Lions Park, so they're continually trying to find places to practice, and Mulberry Fields has fit that need as a T-ball practice destination. And our Zionsville Youth Flag Football has charted out their summer and fall season with 55 reservations for a total of $275. Happy to answer any questions related to these 3 agreements.
If I recall, we adjusted last year pricing to take into account the electricity costs associated with lighting.
Yes.
And I assume that's sort of factored into each of these agreements, the amount of lighting that they would need.
Actually, being the spring and summer, none of these specific agreements requested lighting, but this fall, we've already began to talk with Flag Football about their needs. So that fee was adjusted to reflect a prorated rate of our true costs of turning them on. And I actually want to discuss that we will look at the true costs of operating the field this year and make sure that we're prorating next year's fees as well. So again, we want to welcome them, but there's also costs associated with the maintenance of those fields.
I have a question about process, just from the standpoint that is there, I'm curious, like what the parks decide on these things and overseeing these because they're contracts and they're legal documents, but is there, has that always been the case? You know, it seems like a lot of these things would be more just based upon certain policy decisions that were put in place that your team can make a decision on. I just was curious, like if someone could give me a little background on.
I don't know the background, but I agree. I was thinking the same thing. This is more of an operations thing, unless there's a legal reason that we need to.
It has to do with making sure they have their insurance and a lot of legal ease, basically, to make sure that they are operating and not going to carry the town
Well, I guess-
liable for any injuries.
Well, I guess from my perspective, someone who didn't pass the bar, like, I don't know if I can offer that type of legal expertise in that review. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding, like, my responsibility in looking at these from that very standpoint. Is that, I don't want to, I'm not trying to, I just want to make sure I understand where it's sitting within
I
relationship.
think the way I'm interpreting our role is that it's our job to advise Jared whether or not we think this is an appropriate use of the space,
Gotcha.
that we're
Okay.
good with it. You know, I believe all the legal language of the contracts have all been reviewed by town council and park board council or whoever needs to review it. And I think it's a fairly standard form, right?
Yep.
It's the same language in each one. It's just up to us to decide, do we want to, for the rates or terms that are decided for each group,
Is this an
offer up
appropriate
that
use?
time, because that time then gets taken out of public
I
use.
gotcha. Okay.
So,
okay.
so it's not
okay.
about the reviewing the legal language, because that's Amy's job and Jared's job. But do we agree that we should offer up these time slots to those groups?
Gotcha. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And is that right? I mean,
Absolutely. So,
And that's a fairly open, available process that people come with their what they desire to use it for, and kind of first come, first serve, as long as within the scope of the appropriate sort of determined uses.
absolutely.
Okay,
So that was all kind of drafted in the sports agreement. Just making sure that our liabilities are protected. So they're listing both the park board and the town as additionally insured,
Gotcha.
just in case something happens out there. But whenever there's exclusive use of some part of a park, we want to have some type of framework and guardrails. So
Gotcha.
that's why the agreement template was drafted originally years ago.
Great, thank you. That could have maybe been a question outside of this.
That's
but
okay.
No,
as a new member,
That's probably good educational
larger
recap for everybody.
Exactly. I had the same questions when I first started. So,
Great.
no.
Thank you.
I will,
Yep.
I'll add too, just, I mean, as Jared said, we have this template field usage agreement that addresses a lot of important legal aspects of these relationships. I mean, Jared vets the groups, but we utilize the same template every single time. We can tweak it a little bit if need be. But the contract signing authority lies with the park board.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
anytime we
Okay.
want to have a contract approved, then the park board needs to approve the president to sign it.
That makes sense. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for explaining. Appreciate it.
So in terms of whether or not we think this is a good use, I guess my question is, why did the board or the teams quit using it? And was there an issue with, from looking at rugby, of like the grass getting torn up, or if there was there issues like that where it was decided it wasn't worth it, or did it just kind of?
I think it was a little bit of A, a little bit of B. So as I understand it, in 2007, when the park was being designed and created, there was a nonprofit that kind of managed the use out there. And at sometime in 2013, that nonprofit disbanded, and then it was more left to the teams to work with the superintendent at the time for use of that. And I believe historically some of the requirements for that use of the fields were barriers to participate. They included repairing the irrigation and picking up excessive trash, which is still included today, but just some other parameters that seemed a little egregious. So we scaled that back to invite them back, and now we're looking at the true costs and we'll prorate. And then, we still want to provide this service to the community in our organized sports.
Gotcha. And so we feel like what I was noticing is they're required to help with the maintaining the sprinklers and with overseeding if need be. Like, we feel like overseeding is going to be enough, and we're not going to need turf brought in, et cetera.
Yeah. Based on existing use over the past 3 years, but we do need to up our game as far as our best practices out there, and that's part of the cost analysis that we're going to conduct over this year.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And then just to clarify too, since none of us were around, well, maybe you were, but when the design of that park is really envisioned to be a athletics
Yes.
park, a sports park.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
By far our most active park, with the skate park, splash pad, and then the open space that has the sports lighting.
It's our only park that's allowed to be used during night hours. We
Until
have
11
lights.
p.m.
Until 11 p.m., yeah.
Yep.
So. Any other questions or concerns? Well, you take one motion for all three, or do we?
Let's do three.
Do three motions?
Yep.
All right. Do I have a motion for the rugby team to utilize Mulberry Fields?
So moved.
second.
Roll call vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Zionsville Little League, use of Mulberry Fields for for practice. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Give it to Chad.
Chad, did I get a second?
Second.
You got a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. And finally, the agreement for Zionsville Youth Football League flag to use Mulberry Fields. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. All three motions carried. All right, Mulberry Fields concession stand design services.
Thank you, John. So with all of this increased life at the park, there's obviously the need for facilities. And while we do have a seasonal restroom at Mulberry Fields, it does close each fall and then not reopen until the spring. It's just not a winterized facility. So it is our recommendation, and based on findings from the 5-year master plan, to propose a permanent restroom out there. But this restroom, due to the nature of the park, could also be a concession stand and place for additional storage for our programs and maintenance teams. So to propose a concession stand with up to 4 ADA restroom facilities, as well as a concession and storage area, to be utilized between Shelter A and the pickleball courts. So again, our pickleball users could also access that easily. All those families coming from the splash pad will have to pass by the concession stand to get to their cars, and just being there available for these organized sports that we're promoting out in the park. So working with REA on this one, they seemed like the best fit for the needs of the site. The proposal for the design services, the permitting, and the construction administration of this project would be $89,500. And this entire project can be funded through impact fees from Fund 473. So we are at a deficit of restrooms in our park system. So this is an opportunity to utilize those development funds that come in for every new roof coming to Zionsville to meet that demand. Happy to answer any questions with this project.
The concessions, what will that go towards? Is that supposed to offset some of the cost?
It would go right back into our program funding.
Will you be, the goal is the Parks Department will staff it?
That's the primary goal, but I'm not opposed to exploring partnerships with some of these organized sports and finding what works best for our community.
So I apologize for being new of this, but was this budgeted for, and is this about what was expected?
Yes, yep.
I again, as a park planner, landscape architect, I think Tricia would back this up, but we frequently hear that restrooms are one of the key needs that folks have, and a key barrier also when they're not present to the use of the park system. So I understand the need, especially in the context of the park. Scope of work looks fine to me. I think the question I would have is, as part of that, I see in the approach that you're going to look at, sort of conceptually lay out some additional facilities, to make it that maybe future, just to make sure that this, new concession stand works with what we would hope to maybe do in the future. And I wonder, as part of that, given the sort of up in the air nature right now of maybe reimagining what Winterfest would look like or the ice rink would look like, is there some concept planning we can do around how a potential ice rink or sort of reimagined Winterfest ice rink idea would work and interface with these components in the context of the park?
Yeah, even since the 5-year master plan came out, I think we've re-envisioned where, if and when an ice rink returned, that would be, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be at Mulberry Fields. But all that infrastructure we've established over the past couple of years can still be utilized both for this restroom and to meet the critical need of indoor programming and practice space. When we surveyed each of these teams in the 5-year master plan that are just had their agreements approved, one of their number one needs was a place to practice when it gets cold. Sports have evolved, so it's not just one season and then you go home and you're on the next one. Kids are continually practicing that year round, and there is a shortage of space or rents are just too high. So again, a long-term dream would potentially be to re-envision that space as an indoor practice facility that complements the outdoor facilities on site. And understanding that would change what we even talked about a year ago.
Sure. Tangent question, but while we're on the topic of Winterfest, at what point do we need to bring that up in the calendar year to figure out what a plan is for this coming season? I know it's very early in the year, but there's, if we're going to need to make reservations for things or sign leases or agreements or things like that, is that something we should put on the agenda for like a May meeting, or What's the appropriate timeframe for that?
Yeah, and we kind of had this conversation last year. We're going to pause the rink for several years until our facilities can catch up. So while we had a great time and over 10,000 skaters joined us over those 2 years, we just learned that everyone is extremely exposed at Mulberry Fields. The wind does not let down, and then a simple rain event can cancel an entire day of skating. So we want to allow the facilities to catch up, have warming stations and other amenities on site before we try to tackle that large beast again. But just as we did this past year, Mindy and her team have made an amazing Winterfest tradition, continuing with Christmas in the park and the luminary walks and other smaller activities that will still be under that Winterfest brand.
Well, I think that was great too, because it decentralized that event, right?
Yeah.
It kind of brought it throughout the town, which was great. So, I mean, the ice rink was just a component
Yep.
of that. But okay, very cool. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions about the agreement for?
Just for clarity, right? To follow up on the question, you've got this budgeted for in your funds this year,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, 2024
And then
budget did allocate.
This
from
reconciles
fund.
with your long-term facility planning
Yes.
efforts, right?
Yep.
So,
Any other questions? We have a motion to approve the REA, architectural, how do you want to call this? What's this,
Design, development, construction, drawing services agreement.
for Mulberry Fields? With REA.
So moved.
We have a second?
So moved. Second.
We do a roll call vote. Vice President Ryan Cambridge,
Aye.
Secretary Michael Kaufman,
Aye.
Kimberly Lane,
Aye.
Matt Milborn,
Aye.
Chad Dilly,
aye.
and I too vote aye as well too. Motion carries 6-0. All right, Mulberry Fields and Starkey Switchback lumber purchase.
So despite continuing to grow our park system with new amenities and new levels of service, we also need to take care of our existing infrastructure. So looking at the field or the fence that surrounds the playground at Mulberry Fields, it is beyond its term of life and beginning to fall over, regularly needing boards tacked back up, and the footers are a little unsound. So we are looking to rip that out as a maintenance team and in-house replace that fencing with an updated fence to today's standards. So that is one part of the project, and the other is the Starkey switchback. So the ramp that goes down from the Big 4 rail trail down to Starkey Park, a lot of those deck boards are also beyond end of life, and as you'll notice, despite pressure washing and other attempts, they still are just sodden and lost most of their integrity. So this is an opportunity to not only replace those boards, but as those boards lose their greenness and become a part of the new switchback system, we're also going to explore some additional traction paints to place on that as well to improve the going down that ramp in any season besides the dead of summer.
I was gonna say, I have lots of thoughts on that when we get to it. I go down those about once a day, and it's treacherous this time of year. Actually, it's really easy because you can just slide. You don't have to walk. A question with that, as part of that scope of work, are they replacing only deck boards, or are they going to address any railing issue? I know that we kind of incrementally repair those, Chris, as they come about, but is it just repairing what's needed, or is it purely a decking replacement?
This is purely, well, what's needed, absolutely, but any additional lumber would be smaller purchases on
Got it.
kind of a
Okay.
one-off.
So this is primarily to replace the decking?
Yes,
Got it.
yep.
Is this a complete redecking or just partials?
I believe it's the entire board
It's
foot.
the entire
Yep.
Okay.
ramp the whole way down. We've already been into preliminary inspections, looking at the joists underneath, those are looking in good shape considering the age.
Structurally, it's
Yeah.
Doing all
It's not
right.
going anywhere yet.
Plan to redo every single one of those decks and every one of the turns.
Mhm. And this will all be done in-house?
Yes, yep. It's a heavy lift for our team, but if we leave them alone long enough, they'll be able to knock it out.
How long do you think the switchback will be closed?
That's a good question.
Give me a week.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. As long as you had good weather.
Yeah.
You're right, yeah.
Because we need a motion to approve.
Yes. We have a motion to approve purchase of lumber for Mulberry Fields and Starkey Switchback.
And this will be funded through our Fund 103 improvement line. So that's the $314,000 we receive every year towards park improvements.
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Maintenance chipper purchase.
So the town of Zionsville currently only has one chipper that is shared. We often borrow that from Streets Department, but as you know, that is part of their regular operations with brush and limb and just responding to downed trees and anything else that might happen in a right-of-way. So with our expanding needs with that machine, not only in our day-to-day operations with park maintenance, but also our expanding natural resource division, it's time that the Parks Department invested in their own chipper that should the streets go down, now our town has a backup for those critical services. And should ours go down, we would also be able to still ask for those favors. But utilizing the Sourcewell procurement agreements, this would be for a chipper for our maintenance team at the cost of $60,000, which was exactly what was budgeted for this piece of equipment in our fund for this year.
Jared, maybe for the benefit of some of the newer members or those not familiar with procurement, can you elaborate a little bit on the Sourcewell pricing? Just so they can have an understanding of that.
So Sourcewell is a membership where the program competitively bids for the state, actually the nation, for specific items. And then those are going to be the best prices that you can get for that item with the government contract. So because of our participation in that, we don't have to go receive 3 quotes or, publicly bid some items because they fall within these existing contracts. So saves a little bit of time. It's a completely free program, and it just helps us expedite our operations and keep things moving, and also confirm we're getting the best price we can.
Is this a pull behind?
Yes, so this will be behind a 5-yarder or some other dump truck, pulled to a site and then chipped up on site.
Maybe not the chipper. Yeah, maybe. Then we name the creek stomper. Are we going to name
The chipper.
I mean, talking to foundation, right?
So do we have a motion to approve the purchase of the chipper for $60,000?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
We'll do a roll call vote. Vice President Ryan Cambridge,
Aye.
Secretary Michael Kaufman,
Aye.
Kimberly Lane,
Aye.
Matt Milburn,
Aye.
Chad Dilling.
Aye.
I say aye as well too. Motion carries. 6-0. All right. Next is ecological services at Overly Warman Park.
So for the past 2 years, as we began to open Overly Warman Park to the public, we've noticed a large amount of invasives. Normally, we attempt to tackle that piece by piece, but with the poison hemlock being so prevalent around some of our activated spaces, like the mountain bike track, as well as our disc golf course, that's something we aggressively want to work to remove conflict with the public. So we have completed that in-house prior, but it is a very it's a job that requires a lot of skill and safety precautions to execute properly. You don't want to get any of those fluids onto your skin or any exposed part of your body. So rather than having our team continue to maintain that, we have contracted out that work last year and again before you this evening. So this contract with Stantec would be for the removal of not only the poison hemlock, but also some other invasive species that are within the first couple of holes of our disc golf course, as well as the target area around our mountain bike trail. So each year making more progress. If we proactively attack it, then we're going to have less proliferation in years to come. So for that work, it'll be 4 site visits. That would be $6,750. Happy to answer any questions related to this as well.
And again, this is off of just funded through the maintenance.
Yes, so this is funded through our contractual services line. Last month, you'll know that I said that we had $30,000 towards this type of work, and we spent $23,500. So with this contract, we would be $250 over budget within that much larger fund. and that would come out of the contingency I built in as well. So we have $40,000 of just in cases, and this would be $250 into that little reserve within that one line.
So any other weed wrangles, what have you, will be done through volunteers?
Yes, so for our new members and the public, to explain our natural resource division. So historically, we only had a park maintenance team, which took care of hardscapes and, responded to downed trees and took care of kind of our park assets. But as the stewards of the land for Zionsville, we're also in charge of all of the green space and parkland we maintain. So in recent years, we've actually diverted some of those maintenance resources into staffed positions that focus on those habitats. So our natural resource team goes into the woods rather than staying on the trail to proactively combat some of these species. And the reason we do that, our invasive species degrade the habitat that's there. So even though it might be a flowering species or produce berries, that doesn't mean that they're nutritionally beneficial. And more importantly, they're outcompeting things that are supposed to be there. So just trying to remove the human element from our natural spaces and allow them to be what they should. So made a lot of progress on a lot of projects just in the past 2 years. And we're looking to keep that momentum going throughout our 715 acres.
And I think Overly Warman our house actually backs up on it, and that's a park I'm in frequently. But that presents a unique challenge, I think, because the park was essentially an unmanaged, area of space for 50 years. So it really is just chock full of everything. So I think the bigger bites we can take, the better.
Yeah. And for those of you that are going to be around this spring, we will have several hundred elementary students descend onto Overly Warman Park to pull invasive garlic mustard, and they do that in several of our parks. And that's just one of the initiatives on top of dozens of other that we try to rally the community behind us to make progress.
So my question comes in, we're February 14th, and now you've exhausted that fund.
Yes.
Does that concern you at all for the rest of the year of any unforeseens? And if any unforeseens come up, how would you plan to manage that?
Specifically in ecological services, we're not anticipating any unforeseen since it's kind of proactive. Should we come upon something, we still would have that $39,750 towards contingency. But again, that contingency is for plumbing issues and other things like that. So definitely balancing that. But understanding that this contract requires being approved at the beginning of the year so the 4 visits can happen. And the clearing at Elm Street Green was a cost savings partnership in Lions Park that wasn't necessarily planned for, but we were able to capitalize because we had those available funds. So you likely will not see any more ecological proposals. We'll just continue to do it in-house.
So you said there's 4 visits. Is it so early spring?
2 in the spring and then 1 in the summer and fall.
Okay.
So the 2 in the spring will primarily focus on the hemlock that's going to try to shoot up, early treatment and then a subsequent treatment. And then the monitoring later in the year is more for those other species as well. And with the progress, this $6,000 contract might be able to be reduced to 4 next year because there's less work to go around. So
Will it continue to go, will it eventually go away if we get the invasive, or is it just you're fighting a losing game?
I think that every step towards progress is progress, but it can be discouraging if you zoom back your lens and look at kind of everything around you. So a good example is lesser celandine. So it's an invasive species. It's yellow flower. It's kind of pretty, actually, and that's probably the problem why it's here. But it inundates every single bank of our Eagle Creek corridor when it's in bloom. And that can be really discouraging, but if we can push it down to the creek and it's not infiltrating our prairie habitats or our forest lands, then that's progress. That's a win. And with the clearing at Elm Street Green, that's 3 acres that would have took hundreds of hours of volunteer work that we can now proactively replant, monitor, and upkeep. And we can stay ahead of it until our native species reestablish and edge out those invasives so they can't become established. So it's definitely a march that we will not complete within my tenure here, but it is important work that we need to continue to make progress towards.
And I will say, too, that I think a lot of the treatment of the hemlock over the last 2 years at Overly Warman has made a big difference.
Yeah.
It's a biennial plant. It's a constant battle, but it's a lot better. So, there's a lot to go, but, it didn't all just come back.
Yeah.
So.
And there are success stories. So if you go to Zion Nature Sanctuary, get out your plant ID app, you're going to be hard pressed to find an invasive species because we've done a lot of work in there to get those out. So the smaller footprints are more obtainable over a shorter amount of time. As we look to Carpenter, that will be years of work, but fortunately we have so much community support, I think we can begin to tackle it pretty quickly.
So one last question. So you said the other invasive, so like if they have do any honeysuckle, are they going to clear that out, or is that stay and you guys are?
I don't believe they're treating woody invasives. It'll be whatever they can combat with the same herbicide that they're using.
All right. Yeah. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the $6,750 for Santec to treat invasive at Overly Woodman Park?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Redbud Lane Pollinator Project.
All right.
This is over by Turkeyfoot.
Yes, one moment while I boot up here.
While you're doing that, are we striking the fleet lease
Yes.
discussion
Yes.
for now? Okay,
Oh, we had a discussion prior to the meeting.
got it.
So last year, volunteer members of our community are a part of the Boone County Invasives Cooperative, partnered with a resident that neighbors one of our parks on a pollinator project. I'll keep scrolling here, apologize. And the vision of that is to, one, beautify the entrance to one of our trail connections, and two, provide an opportunity for not only improved habitat in that area, but also demonstrational signage that can help educate what exactly is going on in that pollinator garden. So it'll feature native species that flower and could supplement some of the ornamentals that people often choose. And ultimately, it is just creating more edge habitat from that woodland. So this entire initiative was kind of done between the property owner and the volunteers of the BCIC. And now that they're looking to expand that onto our trail easement, Amy Nooning and I were working with all three parties to create an MOU for this arrangement. So some of the parameters of that volunteers of the Boone County Invasives Cooperative would install at their cost the pollinator garden onto the Redbud Lane entrance onto the trail. And they have also offered to have continued maintenance on that project. Understanding that these initiatives can start out extremely well and then sometimes peter out, we are more than capable of maintaining that should parks need to step in and also maintain that space. So the initial installation and all of its components will be handled by a funder from the BCIC. All of the signage will be vetted through me before it's fabricated and installed. And the longevity and success of that project would ultimately fall to the Parks Department, but we have adequate resources for this very small area. Let me see if I can pull up exactly what we're talking here. The pictures were on another link, I apologize, but this proposal was in your packets, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So the important things are that the garden, if installed, would not implement in any way or affect the trail use or our maintenance of that trail. Again, this is a property owner that's within the easement, so all three parties are on board that this is a good project, which utilizes none of our immediate resources to implement. And as we spoke about Pine Street last month, if this is a success, we could also look at beautifying some of our other trail entrances with similar projects. So this is kind of a tester as well.
This is a bit of a sidebar, but is there opportunities to, when we have, engaged citizens like this who want to do this, to, gently encourage and point them to opportunities to support the foundation as a way of building, financial reserves for the types of things that volunteers do get tired of doing at some point?
I believe this project will be funded in part by the foundation.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, actually the one leading the charge from the BCIC is also a member of the foundation.
Oh,
So
okay, great.
lots of overlap in these communities.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because I'd love to see that, being proactive about directing that any enthusiasm across any of these efforts that they have a quick and easy way to contribute, you know, beyond their time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
How big is the area?
Let's just pull it up on maps here. One moment. I apologize. The photos were not attached to the document that was shared. All right, it's loading up here. All right, if you can see my cursor, we are talking about the mulched area along the trail right here on this side of the split rail fence.
Oh, there we go.
So between the fence and the trail.
Yes, yep. So certainly a demonstration of what alternative native plants are as opposed to some of the ornamentals one might choose for their garden spaces.
I think it's a great project and a great way to sort of, show folks the beauty of native species, and certainly we get a lot of trail use, so probably pretty visible. I have no doubt that Chris and his team are competent to maintain the space, but I do, as I think most of us know, right, establishment is the key challenge. So leaning into that volunteer group to help, especially through the summer, to guarantee the greatest amount of establishment that we could get would certainly minimize any work that Chris and his team have to do later. So as long as they're sort of on board to help with that, I'd be fully supportive.
Yep.
Any other questions or concerns? Do we have a motion to approve the Redbud Lane pollinator project?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
Yeah. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Carpenter Nature Preserve Maintenance Barn Lease.
All right, thank you, John. And I'll actually, Amy, would you like to introduce kind of where we are in the process, and then we can go from there?
Sure, yes. Yes, this is for a small area that includes just a maintenance barn that was previously utilized for the golf course on what is now Carpenter Nature Preserve. In order to lease out this space, we have to go through a statutory process that began with getting 2 appraisals for the fair market lease value. We have obtained both of those appraisals, and so at this point, I think they're both in the packet and for you to note the 2 appraised values. The next step is for the board to determine a minimum bid value for this. After the board determines that value, then we will plug that into a notice that will go into the newspaper and we'll receive bids to lease out this space.
And there is a current tenant there's an entity operating in the space currently. Is that correct?
Yes, there has been, I think, for several years
Yes.
now.
Yep.
He's been there, yes.
Runs a small engine shop, and the town utilizes his services for all, not just the Parks Department, but many different departments utilize his services for fixing small engines.
What's triggering the need to, what's triggering this moment?
Because we now own this.
Yeah,
Because
We
we
now
own it now.
we own the
Yes.
property, so we have
Yes,
to.
exactly.
And so I'm assuming by law, we have to do the open, we can't give him a first right of refusal or he is just like everyone else has.
He's gonna have to bid on it too, yes,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
because whenever the ownership changed and the park board owns this real estate now, we have to go back to the beginning, and in order to sell or lease any part of any real
Gotcha.
estate, we have to go through this process.
So his lease terminated upon sale, or it's
I
now
don't
come
think-
up, or?
I don't think there was an
He has a
active
lease.
lease, but
Oh,
now that
okay.
we're
Okay.
owners, there will be.
So we're getting into
That
place.
helps.
Yeah.
Answer my question.
What are they paying, or him or her?
Currently paying for rent. There's no rent involved at this time.
Oh, so he's
Yep. He was the old mechanic for Wolf Run Golf Course when it was a golf course. The man can fix any small engine in the world. It's impressive. Things our team can take a look at, things we can send to the professional, machinery companies. they may take more time, they may cost more money, but this guy can knock it out. It's really impressive. He certainly is an asset to our immediate operations.
Is there, I'm sorry if this is like preposterous to suggest, but is there like, if he's providing a very great and proactive service for your team, is there work trade opportunities for a lease agreement?
Yes, we could.
We're going to explore all those options.
Okay.
Should he be one of the bidders that submit, and we're hoping he is.
Okay.
And we can put that in the bid language, that that's something that you would consider services in lieu of.
I mean, you're
You know,
saying he's
rent.
great, and he's like,
Yeah.
it just seems like it seems like a really unfortunate situation for someone who's providing a service to this community and to you guys to then all of a sudden be pushed out just
Right.
because ownership switched hands.
Well, especially in the context too, that this is essentially a temporary arrangement.
Right.
Because when Carpenter builds out, this facility goes away.
Yeah.
Right. So even in the so if it is a short-term thing, yeah.
And he's an older gentleman, right? So
Yeah.
he's on the verge of retirement anyhow. So this is pretty much bridging that gap.
Yes.
I just would hate the narrative to be that we keep this guy out because
No, and we've been working very closely with him, informing him of the process we have to follow,
yeah,
and the opportunities we have on the other side. So he's
yeah.
informed, and
Yeah, and I'm suggesting nothing other than the proper protocol, but
Yeah.
to the extent that we can be sensitive and thoughtful of that process, and it sounds like you guys are, then I just wanted to voice that.
I do think it would be good to put that in the lease,
Yes.
you know, the RFQ or whatever we put out, that
Yep.
we'd be willing to consider that.
Yes. Yep.
Have there been any other parties that have expressed any sort of interest in leasing this space?
not to date. I mean, again, those conversations haven't echoed too far out in the community, just because we're bringing it up today and last month. But again, we're talking about our timeline is around 12 months rather than 36. So for someone to bring in all their equipment and want to start up there, that's a big overhead to have such a short duration. So
So this is a 12-month lease that's being proposed, and
eventually, so we're still in step one
Okay.
of leasing it. But that would fall extremely well with our timeline of when the facility might begin to change over and turn towards a public park.
and so I think now I'm getting ahead. So we're deciding there's two appraised values, and we're making a determination of what we're willing to the minimum. Okay.
The minimum bid that
Okay.
you,
Okay.
yes, will
Okay.
consider, because that will, that number will be put in the notice to bidders that we put in the
Okay.
newspaper.
So apologies if this is dumb, but if we're submitting it out for everyone to bid, what is why would we set the bid? Why would we set a minimum very high? Right? Is everyone or do we expect everyone to just bid what we say is the minimum, or are people going to try to, if they want it, they're going to bid what they think is fair market? I guess is my question.
Sorry, I'll have to defer to you, Amy.
Sure. You don't need to set the minimum bid really high. You just need to set the minimum bid. So it can be less than the average of the two appraisals. If you end up accepting a lease for less than 90% of the average of these two appraisals, that's okay. We just need to put another advertisement in. So when you're setting the bid, you can consider the appraised values and also what you think that a real value would be, for the lease, and it
Well-
doesn't have to echo the
And
average.
do we have
of the
to
two.
accept the minimum bid? Do we consider the potential leasee, again, this is going back to another concern, even though we set a minimum bid, if we get people in different price ranges, do you have to take the most that's being offered by law? Because
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's what I figured.
You
Okay.
But if you set this minimum bid, and we put into the bid language that you will consider services in lieu of rent, then that is a consideration then that, you can talk about during the negotiation process with the
What the value of
successful.
those services are.
Exactly, yes.
So
Yeah.
I guess I go back to the market sets what it's worth, right? And so if they're saying it's worth $500 a month and we're saying we'll accept $400 a month and nobody bids, then it wasn't worth $500 a month and it's not worth $400 a month, right? So would we rather go in with a number that is less than 90% because the market is going to determine that?
I think it's a little bit. I understand that question, but I think the appraisal value isn't necessarily what the market would bear, right? It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
appraisal, and I think it's to give us the range of because appraisal is typically replacement sort of calculations and whatnot, right? I'm not an expert in this, but I'm assuming so to your point, I think we stand to get more attention if it's, I think there's a tolerance here, because you don't want to go so low that everyone's like, oh, this is great, and then you get an unnecessary influx of
Right.
things to process. So it seems to me we want to stay close to the range, but have if we can build in flexibility for how we evaluate
How we
that.
quantify the how that value is paid.
Yeah.
Whether work in lieu of, or, fee simple, or,
Right.
whatever, or a combination thereof.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it is, the two bids are what, 500, and what was the other one?
1,356.25. So the average of the two is 928.13 a month.
It just tells me the market doesn't know what this is worth.
Well,
Well, I'm
You
looking
got
at
to
the
consider-
comps going, they just like randomly picked.
well, that's the other part of where this is located
Targeted
is there's nothing like
Right.
this
Yeah.
there. So they
Yeah, there's
have,
no comps.
there's
There's
no
no
there's no
comp.
comps
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
located within. I mean, you have to go into Lebanon,
Yeah.
so in
what's the
Carmel,
average?
so there's this is basically an undeveloped area that doesn't,
Do we restrict the uses of the
Oh, that's a good question.
allowable uses within the lease? Do we have the ability to do that?
We can.
Because that I think would be a concern, right? As if it was, if
Toxic chemicals.
well, I mean, well, there's that, and
There's
also if someone's just like, well, heck, I'll store my airplanes there and pay $2,000 a month. That's
Yeah.
of no,
Right.
that is of no benefit to the town, at a cost to the town if we are relying on the services of someone using that facility. So,
That's a good point, because like this is technically park land, right?
Correct.
So I think in addition to the price, we can set expectations of use, right? Because
can.
so I think that's the determining factor.
because
right?
then price becomes
Price is irrelevant.
secondary to the
Mhm.
use.
Well, not irrelevant, but yeah.
we're narrowing down.
Well, you
the
narrowed
scope.
your pool of bidders
Right.
from 100 to 4.
Because the goal isn't to quickly rent this out to make money. The goal is we just need to do this but a more important and higher value would be to do it in such a way that it brings value back to the park system and
Yes.
to your team. So
Right.
I think, so in my opinion, then I think you keep the bid low, but you set an expectation that limits the sort of unintended, undesirable sort of uses without it being getting any sort of legal problems, right?
or
Well,
require.
I'm trying to say this in a way that's
I would
appropriate,
think
I'm
we
not-
Yes.
would think we would want the most rent coming in for the park, but at the same time, if we're switching out equipment to a year and a half early or 2 years early because we're not I don't know how he would react, but if he decides, well, then go fix your own machines, and we have to replace these things early, I just don't want to be. It seems a little penny rich and pound foolish, right? To cost
It
ourselves more
seems
money. to
I guess
try
the
to-
difference is negligible in the grand scheme of things, so.
Well, let's put it this way. In a hypothetical scenario where we've acquired this land and this building existed, but there was no tenant, there was no desired use, we wouldn't really be looking right now to have this conversation. It would just be a storage facility for parks,
Correct.
right? So I think it's sort of like, it's not the desire to get more than, to generate, if it were a longer term arrangement where we
Sure.
knew that this was
Absolutely.
immediately adjacent to a right of way and that we could have a revenue stream of X for 30 years or whatever, I think that'd be different. But,
Yeah.
it's such a short term, but such a limited use. I feel like if we could find a way in the language to say that the proposed, proposers must, operate a business or an entity that contributes in some way or aligns in some way with the mission and vision of the Parks Department, or I don't know. I don't know how, Amy, that's where you take
Yes.
over. But, if we could figure out a way to do that defensively, I mean, it makes sense to me from an ethical standpoint as the owners of the land being a park board.
Is that part of what we can do now, or what we do now is just pick a price?
A little bit of A, a little bit of B, actually both.
Okay.
Yes.
So minimum, so average, would you say, Amy, it was average?
928.13.
928.13.
Mhm.
And what were you saying about being able to accept 10% or 90% less?
90% of that.
Yes, there's a statute that says if you accept a bid that's less than 90% of the average of the two appraised values, we just have to put another notice in the newspaper that you're accepting a bid for less than 90% of the.
So what's 80?
7%.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, do you, that's like 10% of 92 or 928, 13 is $92, right? Like, why would there be any downside to set that as the minimum and then let the market determine if there's some upside? And
Yeah, and then use this process, this other side of this process to evaluate, and then that way, yeah, I think it's.
I think if you can restrict the uses,
That's probably your best tool.
then the price becomes less of a,
But to Chad's point, I think you still set it low because then
Yes.
you don't, to avoid this sort of, also I think to avoid just having to go back out in the paper too, set it at your
set it
minimum.
at the minimum that we can accept.
Yeah,
Let the
So-
market determine.
Then what happens if we don't get bids, Amy?
Then we,
I feel pretty
start over,
confident
or
we'll
we
receive
don't
one bid
lease
at
it?
least.
Yeah.
We start over or we don't?
I think we probably don't lease it if we don't get a
Do we-
bid. I mean,
Right.
if the existing tenant doesn't want
Doesn't want to bid
remain
for
in
it, yeah, then he has to.
Yeah.
it's more of a headache. I mean, I know that person has a lot of value right now, but it wouldn't make any sense, in my opinion, to bring in somebody entirely new for 12 months in a
Right.
facility that's probably not up to code, or I'm assuming.
Why don't we
anyway.
why don't we consider the minimum dollar amount and then draft language that would restrict that and contemplate that further.
yeah, because I think that's appropriate because I think that's sort of like that's also it's like a deed restriction, right? Like it's all within the bounds of the legality of it. We are the owners of that land. We want it to serve a good purpose, so there's value, and I think that's justifiable and totally ethical.
Right.
So
it's
I don't
honored.
think
Is there a way to like, how do we define what is a contributing or acceptable use? Do we need to define that explicitly, or is it subject to park board approval?
I think that you can define it fairly explicitly and narrowly. I think that you could
So it's
see
small
people
machine
that
shop.
provide services to service the machinery and equipment utilized by the park. I mean, we can narrow.
Because to me,
I just
that,
want to be
tailor
careful.
the
Although
language.
I do want to be a little bit careful here. Like I also want to make sure. Yeah, I don't know. There's I think there's a balance here that we're trying to strike too, though, right? Like, 'cause I don't want to set a weird precedent that like we were being irresponsible with that. So I think we need to be able to really be clear and justify why we're making this. I know this is. I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but this does seem like it sets a culture. It's a culture decision, honestly, in many ways. Like I think it sets a precedent. So I think that's why.
I also think it's a unique situation too, in the sense that
Right.
we have a circumstance here where the value contributed by the current tenant to the town and specifically to the Parks Department is significant in some ways, and that's not something that and this is a temporary arrangement. I'm agreeing with you 100%, but I think it's sort of, how do we quantify that value, right? When we talk about, especially if part of this language becomes a sort of a work exchange in lieu of fee, how do we quantify what that value is that service provides to you, that he provides to you as a department?
Can we direct back to you all to that our recommendation is to set the 10% lower bid just so we can set a floor here, and that we would like proposed language, your recommendation for what you see to be the highest and best use of this facility in the park, because that to me is the way to do this. Like it shouldn't be us trying to figure out how, because we're not trying to keep this person that we don't know in there. That's not our job. But what I don't want to do is inadvertently kick someone out that actually is currently serving a really high value to you all that you're telling me. So like, I think better would be for you all to come back to us with proposed language, if
Do
others.
we have time for that though?
Yeah, I think that's the thing.
We're following the process because we want to be in compliance with the requirements of the state and other entities. So we're doing this by the book in the process it's presented. I would maybe recommend 11% so we could avoid the 10% reposting, correct? Or is it below 10%?
Well, just to be clear, we have to, so the average is $928.13 a month. If we would accept, I don't know what $928.13 minus $92.81 from that, if we would accept something that's less than that 90% of that 9/28/13, that's when we have to post another notice. in the
Oh,
newspaper.
it's not.
You see,
It's
it's
not.
so it's not.
Yeah.
It's not 10% or
Okay.
more. You know, it's 10%
10%
less
off of
than
92.
90% of that.
So really,
If we go with the average, we're good.
That's not. It's not a. I mean, it's a requirement that we have to follow. It's not overly burdensome.
But it doesn't change the reality that we can set the parameter for the
Yeah.
uses. We just have to post it twice.
The other issue is if this person wants it and Jerry Alexander is his realtor, he would tell him he should never bid that. He's
Right.
going to tell him $900, $800 is more than you should be paying. You can find someplace else for $500.
Right.
Right. So that's the other concern is like, do we have any idea of what the problem is? It seems to me nobody knows what it's worth, and so my line of thinking would be more leaning towards maybe the lower of the two appraisals, or maybe lower, more towards the lower end of these averages.
Just accept that you're going to have to post it twice, and then set a use, or like a preferred use.
Well,
So your timeline. Back to the question of timeline, because I also want to move on. What would you? Is this something that we can revisit next month, or do we need to?
I think we would like the opportunity to post whatever the amount is this month. To have,
and posting the amount you
Because that
also
starts a
post
new
the use.
timeline. doesn't it?
yeah,
And the posting is just in local paper, right?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Yeah.
London Reporters.
Yeah.
Can we give direct? Yeah.
What do we
I
think
just don't
about?
want to I just don't want to wordsmith a use sort of. I mean, to me, there's like a nuance to this that I think you all know what that language.
You could potentially authorize Jared to propose language and craft language for the ad that, in his opinion, would make the use most compatible with the current use and the future use of the park. I mean, and then the language could come from Jared.
I like
And
that
then
one.
allow John to sign it when it's ready, if there's.
Well,
a
John
signature.
won't need to sign anything quite yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just have to prepare, the notice is already prepared with these blanks to be filled in after this meeting. So once we fill those blanks in, then we'll just post it. Then what's next is the bids will come in and then the lease will be negotiated and that will be what John will sign.
And the goal is that
ultimate
the
lease.
bids will be posted for review in March.
On this timeline, yes, yeah.
If
So we
we,
need to give you that price.
What was the
And
lowest
we've
appraisal?
given you that.
500.
All right, so why wouldn't we say 500 if that's the lowest appraisal? We did our due diligence as a board. That's what one of the elements of the market.
It's a
is
minimum
telling us,
bid.
I think we say 500 is a minimum,
That we
and
authorized
that,
Jared to put the language in. That is going to be the most beneficial to the Zionsville Parks and Recreation Department, and it's at his discretion of what that beneficial use should be.
Agreed.
Right, because
and that could also include excluded uses explicitly, because I think you could pretty much narrow it, like, we don't want storage of,
right.
you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
some of the low hanging stuff where someone might pay
Right.
the higher dollar and quickly have some group square footage.
Yeah.
You could immediately eliminate those, select your desirable uses, set the bid amount at the minimum, and then at the same time include language that would allow for a work exchange as some sort of compensation for the lease.
So, two things of which one I can only remember right now. What is our liability as the holder of the lease? Like, because I'm assuming at some point somebody's been through this building. Is it up to code? Do we have to do anything to maintain it? Is it rented as it is?
Well, those would be things that we would negotiate in the lease, but it would be as is and those maintenance responsibilities, negotiable. between-
Utilities and the temporary maintenance of the facility would fall to that tenant. I would prefer, we're doing our due diligence as our staff. Chris has been working to get fire codes up. There's fire extinguishers at the site, as he mentioned in his briefing, and we're working with emergency services and also testing the wells on site and the bacteria that may or may not be in there.
I just want to make sure that we're not doing this and we're going to spend more maintaining it for a year
Right.
than what we're getting.
Yep.
that's a good point.
So,
Yeah, I think if the maintenance falls on the leasee, then it's
Yep.
There is.
their risk.
But that language you set when we work on the
The lease.
lease agreement.
Yeah.
Will they require, are we gonna require them to carry a certain level of insurance and name us as an insured? And
All the legalese that helps protect our interests and our liabilities.
oh boy, okay, so this is gonna be a big motion.
Yeah, how to put this? So we have a motion, what's that?
So come on, Ryan.
Okay.
We have a motion to set the lease agreement for Carpenter Nature Reserve Maintenance Barn for $500 and giving Jared what's the right word? Authorization to augment state limited use, the use preferred for the property.
Well, and I would add to that, that in addition to Jared and the Parks Department's ability to determine the highest and best use as it relates to the Parks Department and Park Board as owners of the property, that we would consider a work exchange or some sort of program that as part of compensation for the lease. And so move it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
I have one question, comment.
Too late. Already.
It's not gonna change the motion. Can you give us a breakdown before we get to the point that we're looking at bids of what we pay out from the Parks Department to this person for maintaining our equipment and stuff? Just like the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Averages or, I think that would be useful
Yeah,
if we are in a situation where it's between multiple people or we want to put a dollar amount. I mean, that's the only way we can put a dollar amount on what it's worth
Good idea.
to us, so.
Because we will have to justify that fair value. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Who needs to?
Better, sorry.
All right. Golf cart access at Turkey Foot. No, I'm sorry. Golf course irrigation pump.
Thank you, John. So last year, in looking at our 2024 budget for the golf course, we allocated $50,000 towards capital improvements of the site. The identified immediate need was the replacement of the irrigation pumps. So this was, we received 3 quotes, and the lowest of the 3 was for 2 pumps to be replaced on site for a total of $26,700. And I request your consideration of approving this expenditure and moving forward with this project for the golf course.
It's budgeted and
Yeah, this was the anticipated expense for the year. Budgeted 50,000, came in at around 26.
sounds good.
Yeah. Do we have any other
And
questions?
if we need more, if this equipment should fail, your greens of your golf course would
Be
go
browns.
away. Yes.
I never hit them anyway, so.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor of the placement of the 2 pumps for $26,700 at the Zionsville Golf Course? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Golf cart access at Turkey Foot. This is a discussion of request from the public.
So, thank you. Not asking for any action this evening. I think it would be important to have a conversation as a board as well as invite a public opinion about this topic. So there has been more and more requests for a access of golf carts to traverse the Turkey Foot entrance and bridge to meet up with the Holiday Farms trail that exists. So just to kind of paint the picture of the scenario, both the pros and cons. The white line in the middle of the screen is the existing Holiday Road right-of-way that was deeded to the Park Board a few years back. And as part of the development commitments, that segment alone does authorize golf carts at this time. So they are allowed to traverse on that path and to get to the various holes and greens of the Holiday Farms golf course. Within our park rules, no motorized vehicles are permitted except for maintenance and emergency services on any of our parks or trails outside of designated parking areas. So this would be in conflict of the existing rules of our park system. Understanding that there's always 2 sides to every equation, we are talking about just over 1,000 feet into the park that would allow this connection so that members of Oak Ridge that do drive their golf carts could visit the course utilizing that trail system. Alternatively, Zionsville does permit golf carts on the road, and there is a vehicular route to Holiday Farms via golf cart from those same communities. It's just a more abstract way of getting there if they chose to. Currently, the bridge that you all approved for design services is not rated for this type of activity, but as we go through that design process, it could be able to accommodate because it'll accommodate an ATV ambulance vehicle. So truly, it's more of a question about the ethics of our park system and what values we hold for some of our trails, as well as some exceptions we're allowing in certain situations. So that's kind of the overarching scenario. I just wanted to show some of the infrastructure that's on that holiday trail. You see the fences, and then there's also the gates where those golf carts do cross as regular play, as well as some of the signage that is on site. But really, we are talking about that 1,000 feet into the park from the parking area.
Is that the gray line illustrated here?
Sorry, that is the red line,
The red line.
beginning from the parking area, crossing over, and heading towards where the white line begins at the property boundary. And this is the existing infrastructure. So currently, golf carts are not permitted on any Zionsville pathways or trails. And those bollards were installed to deter that activity. We have pedestrian and cyclist stamps there on the pavement. And that is a picture of the bridge, which will be getting very much the same span, but different approaches as it goes towards it. So the path is 12 foot up until the bridge. And then where it meets the holiday trail.
So the bridge, would a golf cart, if the golf cart was going on a bridge, I'm assuming someone coming from the opposite direction would not be able to all simultaneously be crossing the bridge.
There are some concerns. I think of, the person with the dog or the person with the stroller that's having a golf cart coming at them and the intimidation that might have, especially these choke points. But should this be permitted, we would sign this section of trail that the golf cart would defer and yield to all other users. But again, those conflicts could arise in these tight corridors.
Well, I think something worth noting too, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, but the bridge is due for replacement, and we would have the ability, should we choose, to augment the design of the bridge to accommodate the use of the golf cart and or, it already will accommodate the weight, but we could say, look, we can change this in a way if we want so that we can, it can accommodate golf cart use. But the rest of the trail is not being replaced.
Correct.
Right. And is it correct that the trail that exists currently was not designed with the understanding or the intent that it would be shared use with the golf cart?
Correct. Yep.
What's the width of that 1,000 feet of the trail versus what goes into Holiday Farms? Are they the same width?
I would have to get a tape measure for the exact, but I believe the park is slightly narrower than the actual right-of-way.
Well, I think something else to consider there too, from a design standpoint, is it's not just the width per se, although that's a very important metric. It's also sight lines and design speeds, just like you would consider for a road, right? So I know there are some cyclists that move pretty quickly, but I think that's a consideration also if there's golf carts that are moving at a.
Yeah, that was going to be my question: is how fast does a cyclist go versus a golf cart?
Cyclists. I mean, if they're
Cyclists can go a lot
20 miles an hour.
Yeah, a lot faster than a golf cart, but it has a lot less critical mass if it impacts somebody else, I think.
Is this an issue anywhere else, or is it just this 1,000, anywhere else in our park system, or is this just 1,000 feet? I'm worried about setting precedent.
Well, that was one of the major discussions that we had with this. That's why I wanted us to be able to discuss this before we brought it, to everyone else, to the town, and for you guys to understand. Yeah, that is one of our big concerns. Is obviously we have the big four that now is widened, and it could open Pandora's box.
And we literally have subdivisions popping up everywhere along that. Like my bigger concern is the precedent that we're setting. And I don't want to restrict people from using it, and I get the convenience, but if there's another path.
It's just a long ways around what it is.
Well, it's a slightly inconvenient route, but at the same time, the town passed legislation last
allow
year
them to do that.
specifically to codify the use of golf carts on public roads for this exact purpose, correct?
Yes.
That was because there was that was not previously allowed, but now it is allowed. So there is a mechanism currently in place to use the town's existing roadway infrastructure with a golf cart if desired. Is that accurate?
Yes, there's a permitting process, so there is a licensed driver that's insured.
Right.
Um,
So that wasn't previously true, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. That didn't, golf carts were not prohibited on the road.
Correct. And I believe it was a limited amount of roads initially, and that has been expanded.
Right.
Exactly.
And that the area that it expanded into would include the areas
Yes.
necessary to support this use.
The alternative route.
Sure. Yeah, I'm of the same mindset. I think we're in a position here where we're sort of precedent setting because, there are trails that go through lots of communities. I think the general perception of most people would be, hey, a golf cart fits on that. Why can't we do that? As a park planner, park designer, a landscape architect, I think that's not a compatible use on a trail for the general public. That's my personal opinion. There's already gray area and sort of discussion and concern around where do e-bikes and scooters fit into that, and a golf cart is a giant e-bike.
The state has set the precedents for the e-bikes so that they are allowed.
Well, and so here's just being totally frank, right? I think there is concern, or at least I think we should acknowledge the risk of someone who might go to the 19th hole at the golf course and have a couple beverages and then drive his golf cart home. That's something that people do when they golf is, drink either on the course or afterwards. So I think that's also something to keep in mind is, that the possible risk of that is higher in this instance, I think.
It also seems higher though on a road.
Yeah. Well, right,
We're
but
already
at
making
least
them on the road.
right,
And
but
if we're
at least
making
in
them
that
take a
sense,
road-
they are the smaller of the. I mean, that's a risk they shouldn't take.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's a bigger accident also, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But there's also on the roads, the police are patrolling those.
They
and
monitor
they're-
that, yeah.
And they're not going to be driving up and down our pathways.
I want to just zoom back for just a second because I think regardless, this is going to be a potentially very contentious issue because there's different types of experiences and different preferred experiences on trails and I think you can make a lot of arguments around what is appropriate use and I agree that precedent is a concern, but I also would say that precedent, and this is not to push this in one way or the other at all. I just think, again, zooming back, precedent doesn't necessarily mean, like the precedent we set could actually have parameters around it that are specific to context and specific to use, right? Does that make sense? So I just want to make sure we're not thinking about this as,
No, I hear what you're saying.
because I want to make sure we go in this very measured and have a process by which we talk about this that is sort of separate from our own personal experience or preference and so I think that's going to be really tricky here because I do think it's going to be a very, very contentious.
Well, and I think we kind of already have a little bit of a precedence, right? Because you alluded to it, Jared, right? That there are sections of the trail that do currently allow for shared use of, non-motorized traffic and golf carts. Is that correct?
Yes, in the holiday subdivision stretch specifically.
Right. So those already exist, but they exist. Those are part of the development agreement for that property. So that trail, the alignment of the trail, the view sheds, the intersections, its interface with other pedestrian elements, all of those were designed with the intent or knowledge that they would be used by both golf carts and vehicles. So I think that there is the precedent to me is, do we have trails that allow golf carts on them? We do. We already do. And could we in the future, and maybe even should we in the future? Sure, if it makes sense. But I think that it needs to be a trail that was designed with that in mind. And or there needs to be study done to ensure that whatever, if someone were to ask to use a trail, like in this instance, it definitely was not designed with
Well,
that
one thing
intent.
I want to make sure everyone knows, this was a gravel road. I drove this road when I was 16 years old. There was a road, it was a 2-track, but it was a gravel road. That was my way to come in town from Union way back in the day. So, what's that? Holiday Road into Turkey Foot. So it was a gravel road forever, but it's been abandoned probably since I was probably 18. the ground is compacted, and so it depends on how actually they, what they did when they built the trail, because that was actually built by, repaved and everything was done by Holiday Farm Development, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
so-
Right, well, I think that, again, here we're getting into sort of design
Right.
parameters around load bearing and things like that versus desired and
Uses.
anticipated uses,
Uses,
right?
yeah.
So if this were a gravel track, then now we're talking about, do we let golf carts on a gravel track? I'm like, why are we talking about that? But at some point, this was designated a multi-purpose trail, which now puts that sort of in conflict with, because there is not an existing development-based agreement that says golf carts are allowed. We're in a position where now we have to decide whether or not we will allow it because it isn't currently permitted within the park.
Because right now it's just crossing though, right? Or they actually have a section they can drive on.
Currently, there's no park property that golf carts are permitted, except for the Zionsville Golf Course, which is town property.
I don't
Let
really.
open this conversation back up, because at some point you guys made a decision to put those bollards up, right? I mean, so that there was a decision at some point that there would be no golf carts in this section of the trail.
But yeah, well, that was, before this actually continued on, that trail took you around, we discussed about the pollinator farm. That was the only really trail that was there, because you could not go any further. You could, but it was all private property. So now they built this new golf course there,
Right.
and now we have members of, the community that's nearby that wants
Are requesting to
requesting
use this
access so they can,
It's a
they can get
request
there
of-
much faster.
Some members of the golf course that live.
So I've always, I'm not a Trekkie, but one thing I want to say is like the need of the many outweighed the need of the few. So there's a very small population that is requesting this. It's a close by neighborhood. That's one thing we needed. That's why it's most important next month to get people to come in and voice their opinion as
Right.
John, can
community.
you clarify? I know I think there are people here tonight that have opinions about this, and I don't know what the because I haven't been in a meeting where we've had a lot of public show up, so I don't know
Yeah.
what the protocol. Can you educate us
Like on whether
just
we're
on
having
whether we can have
discussions
comment
tonight
now, or what that process looks like, so the public can be heard?
That would have occurred during the public comment at the beginning of the
Right.
meeting.
That's
And
okay.
this was more of just an introduction of this topic, allowing that time at the next meeting.
Well, and I think so. Going back to the idea of precedent setting, right? And I agree with you that it's not, are we setting a precedent of will we or won't we? It's what are the conditions that trip a will or a won't?
The process and then the sort of the implications and policies associated with that decision are the precedent.
Right.
Not the decision, yes or no.
Yes.
And I think that's critical to keep in mind as we go through this process, especially in a potentially
Right.
contentious,
Well,
strong.
Sure.
strong
It's a
feelings
big
about-
gray area,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think that as we think about what those precedents are, to me, something to be considered when we think about this specific segment, but then also others, right? Is there another route for that desired use that exists, right? So, if we were entertaining the same sort of request or concept in another area where there just was no road, there was no other way for that connection to be made that was reasonable or safe, then I think that would be something that would need to be considered. Whereas if there's a situation where the request is made, but that there is an existing route or an existing way for them to use their desired mode of transportation within the sort of current ordinances that are set up by the town, then the preference would be to not allow that use on the trail.
But I think another question I would have, and sort of this thinking this through, is just like, is there alternatives for cyclists and pedestrians to safely get to where they want to come and go that are not having to interact with other modes of transportation that is high pressure or high,
See, that to me is a better question, right? Of like safety and different steam. Like part of this seems to me like this is bureaucracy that drives people crazy.
Right.
Of like, man, it's 1,000 feet and can't we just do this? And there is another road, but people are going, man, I have to travel all over. I've got to go all the way out of my way. I can see where I'm trying to go, and I can just go straight here. But the things that I'm concerned about are like, but does it cause a safety concern, number one? Number two, if we have to redo this road or bridge to make it compatible, is there going to be a cost to that? I'm assuming there will be. And then who's going to pay that cost? I don't know that the town should pay the cost for a few people at Holiday Farms. But if there's a way for them to chip in the cost, then maybe that changes the conversation a little bit.
Well, that would go like back to like, that'd be like an impact use fee,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that. But yeah, I think you're safe. I think the safe, and I don't know how you would. Is there a way to methodically figure out the true, again, because like we can make assumptions about is it safe or is it not. There's also perceived safe, which that's kind of a thing that I think is worth considering though too, because if there is a high volume of people who then would perceive this as less safe and then don't feel comfortable using it, I think that's worth considering. But again, I think it's I want to be very neutral and I'm not trying to make an opinion on this at all. Again, I want to stress the process that, and then any policy or decisions that are made around that we're really clear about that. So as we move forward.
Yeah, I would agree, and because it goes both ways when we say this is just for a few people, and then that also means there's just only going to be a few cards. But at the same time, if there's only going to be a few cards, but people perceive it like there's going to be a lot of cards, it doesn't matter if there's only a few cards. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely worth considering on both ends of the issue.
I anticipate we're going to get, just by some of the, visible consternation now, I think we'll receive some emotional responses in the future and strong opinions, and we just need to be prepared for that and take that and do our duty. And
yeah, I would welcome that public feedback. I'd like to understand from the town and from the folks that we have the responsibility to represent what their opinion is on this. I think, John, I don't quite grasp what you were saying about the thoughts of few don't necessarily benefit. What was the phrase that you used?
The need of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Yeah. My interpretation of this scenario is you're going to have strong opinions on both sides.
Right.
And then you're going to have a lot of people that are ambivalent. I would just like to know more what the public thinks on this. I would also like to know just what the width is of that compared to what the width is on the one at Holiday. And if I think we need to go through again if there's bins and turns just from a safety factor. I think for me, where my head's at is a safety component too. I've been on that trail when bicyclists are on that trail, and that's scarier to me than a golf cart, frankly. So I think it'd be interesting to see what the public has to say.
Especially if you're on the trail with a 3-year-old and those bikes.
are there other maybe not even in Zionsville, are there other neighboring communities that have similar situations and
I
similar?
think Westfield allows them on all the trails, right?
I would have to research that.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of all over, not just locally, but nationally. I think the challenge is too, the ordinances are all over, but then the design standards on which the trails are based explicitly exclude motorized uses as part of the design criteria, which is part of the challenge, right? So like when a landscape architect or a planner designs a trail, whether they use NACTO standards or ASHTO standards, none of those take into account golf carts as a compatible use if it's a traditional multi-purpose trail. So that's sort of the conundrum, right? Is because even with the current facility and even with our newest trail design standards that are based on national best practices, those national best practices do not include motorized uses as part of that.
But on that, just to play devil's advocate on that for a second, you have pickleball courts going into tennis courts. Like there are things that are designed that get repurposed all the time.
But the court is then augmented to allow for that.
Fair.
Right, so that's the difference, and that's why I would say
built for that.
Right, and that's why I would say in an instance where, look, if we said at some point, hey, we're going to allow this use on here, then I think we would need to develop standards around, well, what does the cross section of that trail look like so that it's the safest use possible. So, for example, I think a good example, I guess, maybe just. I'm just throwing this out there because I don't think there's anything to support this from a best practices standpoint. But, we have a 2-foot clear zone on each side of the trail. Well, why is that, right? That's so if you roll off on your bicycle, you've got 2 feet to correct or to pull off to the side. That a golf cart's a lot wider than 2 feet, which is why road shoulders are wider than 2 feet in most cases. So, and again, I know that we're not talking about super high speed traffic. I know that we're not talking about, 500 of these at a time. But it is an instance where we're sort of considering whether or not to allow a use on a piece of infrastructure that was just never designed for that use, and as a general best practice nationally is just not designed for that use. So it's not to say whether it could or couldn't, whether we should or shouldn't. That's the conundrum, though.
Well, I'm sure at the end of the day, the public will agree that we spend a lot of time talking about this. that can be for sure.
All right.
So help us understand at the next meeting, we hope and welcome for a lot of public discussion. What is the expectation of the board at the conclusion of that meeting?
So our timeline is not definite as in next month's action. I just wanted to propose this situation and have your motion on it prior to development and design, which we are just beginning at this stage. So we do have.
That was going to be my question: is how far down the tracks is design?
Yeah, so we just kicked off, just met on site. So there's a lot of initial surveying and things that are going on right now. The timeline for bid currently for the bridge would be November. Granted, it's going to be very much complete before November. That's part of the permitting and things like that. So we have time right now. It doesn't have to be the March meeting, but I think if we utilize our channels to get the message out that we are exploring this opportunity, and if someone would like to provide input, this is the means they can do that. We'll welcome that. And I will provide additional context and information concerning parameters of the existing trails.
Would it be, as you do that, would it be possible, I'm putting just more of a financial stewardship lens on this, whatever delta it would be to make the existing trails compatible with what you see at Holiday Farms, where we already say that, we've already set precedent that's acceptable to be there. Would it be possible to draft what that cost would be so that the public can then know this is not only policy-wise where we would need to look and review, but cost-wise, this is what we would have to contemplate for us to legitimately say this is what it would take for it to be safe.
Absolutely. And I'll just mention on that note that the span of the bridge is not changing. So regardless of our design of the abutments, that'll be the limiting factor for that span.
The span or the width of the bridge?
Both. So we're improving the abutments, not necessarily the span of the bridge, which
Right.
is still in perfect health.
Right, which that I think across that length is your greatest pinch point, right? Because we're going to improve the abutment to accommodate the weight of a ATV ambulance, which is far in excess of a golf cart, even one loaded with stuff. But the width doesn't change. So, if that golf cart were to the width of the I don't know what the width of the bridge currently is. Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's right around 10, but I'm going to get the tape out before next meeting.
Okay, so it would be interesting to know that, right, of whether those two uses could safely pass. I know that the signage would require golf carts to yield, but in the instance where you end up on the bridge at the same time, how does that?
And just procedurally speaking, just to play right in the center, either we hold the line that we don't allow this activity and nothing changes, or we would develop signage and markings that would allow and accommodate this regardless of what we decided. So thinking of the abutments as a waiting point to make sure the bridge is clear before going for the carts to go across, that could easily be incorporated into the design, as well as just using paint to mark, the abutments of a resting spot before going over. So open to what the community and what the park board votes on this matter. Either way, we'll find a solution.
Very good.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So next is the resolution to amend the Zionsville Park and Recreation rules.
Thank you. Speaking of considering rules and updating. So we just went through this exercise last year, adding some context, but within that 6 months, there's also been some national trends and local concerns that we just wanted to address. And internalize that within our rules. So the park board updates and monitors the rules of our park system, and then through our parks department and police department, we enforce those. So the only changes to the existing rules that I am proposing for your consideration this evening is one, to have our park hours match our parking lots. So that is Rule 14. Historically, there was a clause within the 14th note that vehicles were only not permitted between midnight and 6 a.m. I'm not sure why that clause was there, but with this update, dusk, park closing, that matches the parking lot. So any vehicles after then, the police would have a tangible tool to investigate and enforce. Alternatively now, If that car is there till 11:59 and then decides to leave, despite being past park hours, they would be permitted. And our neighbors, around our entire park system don't necessarily enjoy a car parked in a parking lot as it's dark and wondering what's going on in there. The second rule change is just to keep up with trends and emerging technologies, and this would be for consideration of drone activities in our parks. So drones are heavily regulated by the FAA, so our actual parameters that we can set are quite limited. But at this time, I don't feel that we have a best space for flying operations to promote that. So the rule I am proposing is no person except authorized town staff or public safety personnel shall launch or land or cause to be launched or land any unmanned aerial vehicles within park property except in designated areas. And at this time, we have no designated areas, but should that opportunity present itself, then I think it's another form of recreation that we could promote and have that as one of the destination features of that park. But just as this time, as we look at our open spaces, the majority of our open spaces without a plethora of trees are highly activated. So Heritage Trail Park has the dog park, and then the community gardens. Mulberry Fields has sports leagues all year long. And to promote the launching and flying of that is something that I don't think we're quite ready for, and we should actually take the opposite stance. Now, it's also important to understand that we would have no control if a drone was flying over a park. This is simply to control that they could launch and land from our park property. So if they were 5 feet off the road in a neighboring property and launched, we would have no control over that.
And then walk onto the property. And then walk
Correct.
out to land.
Yep.
Okay.
A question, again, this is sort of like there's a lot of different best practices on this. This seems generally in line with a lot of policies I've seen. The only clarification I think you may want to consider adding is it says no person except authorized town staff or public safety personnel. I wonder if you wouldn't want to consider adding a comma to that and then adding sort of individuals or entities authorized by town staff. So as you think about like in the design and construction industry, a lot of construction observation and photo documentation is done by drones flown by folks who have the appropriate FAA Series 2 licenses and all that kind of stuff. But those technically aren't town staff, right? Or public safety personnel. So I think that's something you may want to consider. I don't know that I would change any of the rest of it, but you may want to consider adding individuals explicitly authorized by the town staff. Yep.
Yeah, and if this is if the intention is, that's the intention, I would also say public safety personnel with jurisdictional authority. Because if you're a public, like technically as this reads, any public safety personnel could.
That's true.
But it does say authorized. I mean, does that mean authorized to do it?
Looser language just to set the expectation, but if we need to define further, I'm happy to do that as well.
I just want to make sure you don't,
So are we talking about like some sort of big drone, or are we talking about people's toys?
Any.
This is not. This is any or all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're over the 249 gram weight limit, anyway, that trips all kinds of other.
Yeah.
That's a commercial drone at that point.
So do we not have any places for people to like fly a kite?
Kites, yeah, we don't permit kites. We don't have a rule against kites or those foam planes that you would throw, but it's the actual motorized unmanned aerial vehicles that we don't have an existing rule, nor do I feel we're adequately prepared to designate an area where that could happen at this time.
Okay.
And the only prior comparable in sort of the Parks and Rec world are the older school sort of RC model planes, which a lot of older county parks and certain areas had model airplane airports and designated areas for flying those, and they weren't allowed at the time. It just openly, because of the potential interaction with crashing or other people that aren't part of that activity. So there's a designated space for it, and there are other drone. There are other parks locally that have drone landing areas or launching areas, but it's a controlled and designated space.
So is that the concern? Like people would get hurt, or is it like because like with kites they're flying?
Well, I think the concern is that people would get hurt on the ground because they're not very heavy, but they can go. Legally you can't go about 400 feet, but you can go above 400 feet if you want to, but at some point you'll reach terminal velocity and this thing is falling from the sky if you lose control of it. If you're flying them and you don't heed the battery warnings, they will literally just fall out of the sky. The other issue is that inexperienced pilots, when the drones take off, even a drone you can go buy at Costco, I mean, those rotor blades spin fast enough and are sharp enough that they can cut off your finger if you touch them. So if someone is flying this thing at 28 miles an hour, loses control and flies into a playground, I mean, it could really seriously hurt someone, whereas a kite or a foam plane wouldn't. So it's not just about something being in the air, it's that it actually has some mechanics behind it that are fairly dangerous.
I would think it would be good of us to try to get some designated areas, because that seems like something somebody would immediately buy to take to a park.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to be fair too, like Jared said, it doesn't, we don't have the real ability to restrict airspace. But the launching and landing tends to be the most dangerous portion of the flight.
And then just real quick, why was the times different? Was there a need at some point for people to like take a nap if they're tired, or like?
They really don't know why there was a variation.
Okay.
It was just on the books.
It's not
and-
like we're by the interstate with somebody who would want to pull over and.
You never know.
But the ultimate hangup was that the police could not enforce until those hours. So it was just kind of in conflict with our messaging and what we wanted to accomplish. So,
We had a community member
Last
raise
month,
this last month.
yes.
December, yeah.
December.
So we think that this will resolve the concerns the community member has?
This would allow the police to enforce
Okay.
the desired outcome anyways, which would be that our parks are not inhabited except by wildlife after the designated hours.
So, Amy, since there was some question on the verbiage, could we do this resolution now?
Yes, you can do the resolution with that amendment, and we can write in the amendment, and then we can reprint the exhibit.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the only explicit change was the addition of personnel authorized by the town.
And public safety within jurisdiction.
Well, but I think it would solve, I think the way you just said it would solve both those things at once.
Yeah, you wouldn't have, it would.
Well, it would say, I think it would say, well, the or is what throws it off, right? So if you were just to say, except authorized town staff and public safety personnel.
Well, if you got,
Yeah,
state
you
police.
eliminate the or, and then you add
Huh?
to that personnel, authorized by the town.
Or you,
I was going to say with public safety personnel, right? If you have state police there, they're not going to be town staff, but they would be public safety personnel. So
well, that's what I was saying with jurisdictional
With
authority.
jurisdictional authority.
So you think that would be still good to keep that in?
Yeah.
All right, so do we have a motion for resolution 2024-01 for the adoption of Park and Recreation rules, and with the augmentation of removing the or, adding and, along with jurisdiction authority
And personnel.
And personnel
Authorized by the town.
town.
You got that.
So moved.
Second. So roll call vote. Ryan Cambridge,
Aye.
Michael Kaufman,
Aye.
Kimberly Lane,
Aye.
Matt Milburn, sorry.
Aye.
Chad Dilley,
I
and I say aye as well too. Motion carries. Snow removal policy updates.
So another rule and policy opportunity for you to consider. Really the only changes, and I plan to do this in January when we actually had snow on the ground, is when I made these revisions. So with our park expanding, we have new properties that just simply were not listed in the snow control policy. So it is our stance that we do not have the manpower to remove snow in a timely fashion in all of our parks and trails. That is just not feasible in any capacity, nor do we want to proliferate the salting of our trails and park system due to the salination contents and the environmental impacts that it'll have. So when Chris earlier mentioned the key salting points at bridges and tunnels, that is specifically for public safety, but not the overarching park system. So to designate our procedures for how we respond to snow events, this policy was created years ago, listing our priorities. So just like every property owner in Zionsville, we are responsible for the pathways that immediately adjoin our property. So that is our ordinance-related clearings. And I've just updated that to include Overly Warman Park and the Zionsville Road Trailhead, which previously were not on the 2022 plan. Beyond that, I think the only other addition is the fact that we have a northern expansion of our Big Four Rail Trail. So that is considered in this policy as well. But everything else the same. We start with our ordinances, and those can trigger our overtime pool to respond to those weather events. We have a very limited overtime supply, so those again are kind of issued in this policy, and so everyone is on board with how we operate in those events. Level 1 priorities would be after those ordinance clearings, then we begin to work on those sections and down the list and so on. So unless we have an extremely aggressive snow event that is a blizzard with several feet, there's a large chance that we will never get to some of those lower priorities in the snow policy, but we still wanted to make the framework for responding. And we don't sit on our laurels, so we actively activate appropriately when there's a snow event, but if that snow event is sticking around all month due to temperatures, we will work our way through the trail system according to the levels. So this is simply just to bring this before you and for your consideration on updating the 2022 policy to include our new parks.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, so maybe I'm just not looking at this correctly. You currently do not clear any trails?
We clear as many trails as we can in the priorities that are listed in here.
Got you. You're just saying you don't salt them?
Correct.
Okay.
We salt very key points, so like the village
Where
sidewalks and
there's
where safety is the biggest concern.
Okay.
So do we have a motion to accept the snow removal policy as presented?
So moved.
Do we have a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Public art policy introduction.
After our last discussion in January, Michael brought up and the whole board brought up some great points about developing a framework for how we procure, how we accept art proposals moving forward. So looking at several national examples and working with Michael, we've began to establish this draft, which was in your packet for your review. I don't plan on going through all of it, but just kind of outlining some of the major points, and then we can have a further discussion next month with your consideration. So the purpose of this plan is to create a formal means for the Town of Zionsville Parks and Recreation Department and Zionsville Board of Parks and Recreation to manage public art within its park system. It is the purpose of this policy to provide public art that is safe and secure, of high artistic and cultural significance, of interest and appeal to the community, and compatible with all other uses and operations of the parks. This document is intended to act as a guide to provide primary policies for present and future public art opportunities in the community. While the park system currently owns several pieces of public art, a system needs to establish an order to manage potential art acquisitions and loans through donations, commissions, or collaborative projects. So again, we can talk about this further, but some of the goals, obviously, it is our belief in the Parks Department that while we offer all of these outdoor amenities for recreation, there's also space for public art, expression, and cultural wellness in our park system. So understanding those opportunities and embracing them when they can enhance a space, either through placemaking or establishing a new destination in our park system.
I just have to add that Jared did a great job on this. I gave very little input, and he pulled together what I would say was a really stellar policy, which is not easy because there's so many. I'm sure you found hundreds of these things that are all over the map, but you managed to find, I think, the stuff that is the stronger. Yeah. So. Anyways.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely tailored to where we are today and understanding as we are a smaller board and parks department and community, but also anticipating some of those potential needs and conflicts in the future. I think that's important. I
We're
think it's
gonna be
all,
glad we have this, because if you think people are gonna be contentious about golf carts, wait till there's another piece of
Yeah.
public art being considered by their opinion.
and I think it's important to note that this is only for our parks system.
Yeah.
This is not for the town as a whole or public spaces. So that would be an overarching policy that the town would spearhead, but this could certainly supplement and support that.
And the trails would fall under this?
Most, yes, any trail deeded to the park board would fall under this.
So it's tied to the deed, not the use.
I would say that defines our park system.
You do bring up an interesting point, though. We need to make sure that this policy isn't like superseded by the town's policy. I mean, like, it could be superseded in certain parts, but I guess like I don't want to go through the exercise of creating something that then is nullified or.
Yeah.
I think the park board will retain the authorization and authority within the park system.
Okay,
So, yeah.
as long as that's clear with the city, I think.
So just moving down some of the triggers. So we, for example, have the butterfly wing trail that we do each season. That is 2 pieces of plywood that we invite local artists to paint and then we put on display for a couple of months. Those types of activities we want to keep within the Parks Department and our trusted experience. We understand the guidelines and the values of our park system and feel in control of that program. But for anything larger than that, there is the recommendation to create an oversight committee. This would be a volunteer committee that would form with park board members, with cultural district members, local artists, for a specific project, evaluate that proposal, and then make a recommendation to the board for formal approval. So just a secondary step prior to you all that might have some layers of expertise and consideration for all the various things that could go wrong with the donation or could go very right. And that would be a base-by-base situation. If we had a proposal, we would form that committee. I would record the minutes from that and put it in our park board packet. And then it would be for you all to consume and consider in the following meetings. And more of it is just creating that framework for some of the recommendations that committee could consider in those situations, maintenance costs, appropriate materials for design, and things like that. So I tried to get as many things as we could think of in this policy to spearhead any anticipated conflicts or issues we might have down the road. But in recent years, we have been the recipients of several art donations, and I don't want to deter that, but I agree there should be a process because, and a shelf, a life cycle for that piece of art so that should our values as a community change, we don't have to be tied to it, or if it is time to retire it and explore something
That
else.
was one of the things I stressed. Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things about this is that I think there's this conception that, you know, like public art is forever, and it really shouldn't be. Because there's no such thing as forever, and then there's a cost for it to be forever that just only increases over time. So having some parameters, at least setting the expectation so that if it is expected to be kept for a while, there's money associated with that long-term maintenance care.
Well, and this provides a decision-making framework
Yeah.
that we can defensively follow when we're presented with a situation.
Exactly.
To make a choice like that.
Thank you for putting this together. This is
You're
nice.
welcome.
Very good. Very well.
I look forward to serving on that committee.
Perfect. Have our first volunteer.
Yeah. As long as you don't ask me to plan anything, we're good.
Well, if there are no immediate questions, I won't ask for any action, and we can continue this next month and decide whether we want to implement it as a policy.
Perfect. Good job. All right. Moving on to old business. In the same light that we just discussed, temporary public art installation agreement, special permit agreement. This
So
has to do
yes,
with the,
last month we introduced a art installation, which was the catalyst to these conversations in this framework. So understanding that this opportunity is time sensitive for us to seize upon it, and it is also temporary, I would still request that your consideration to authorize the artist to install this temporary installation along the rail trail for a designated period within the month of May, to be removed within 10 days after the term. The artist did provide certificates of additional insurance, listing both the town and park board as additional insured.
Is it your opinion, Jared, that the installation as proposed would be congruent with the public art policy draft that you have put forth?
Despite sidestepping the parameters and the processes, yes. So this installation is.
Despite all of the upfront important stuff, yeah.
I think the
Yeah, the intent's there, yeah.
I would.
Subject, absent the process, but the
That
sort
would
of
be my
parameters
opinion.
around the intent and some of the concerns that you feel like those are addressed in this policy.
Yeah, I think we've covered our liabilities as well as our ability to monitor and protect the installation for the time being, and the opportunity it will have to enhance our programming we were already planning. I think it is nature-based to some extent. It is a little abstract and thought-provoking, and it's temporary. So should someone absolutely hate it, well, then it'll be gone by June. And
If no one absolutely hates it, then it's not.
I think.
Someone's got to hate it. If you're pleasing everybody, it's not that interesting.
How long is the installation going to take again, you said?
installation should only take 2 days, or 1 day and then a 2-day removal.
Okay, and then you said they have 10 days to remove
After
after May 31st, so
Yeah.
by June 10th, it needs to be
Yep,
removed.
out of there. Yep, and she's happy to be a great partner with that. And
Did we find out if we can auction off any of them?
I did not ask that. I feel weird asking that. So
Can I?
But you can.
I can ask that. Do I have permission to contact the artist?
sure, her contact
Okay.
information was in the packet.
Sweet.
I make a motion to approve as presented.
Can we add just with the note that well, I mean, the minutes will show that we're doing this because of timing in advance
sure.
of the policy, but the
Sure.
the policy is in process. Yeah.
Sure. In lieu of an existing
Yeah.
policy or ordinance, I would propose approving a motion to approve, given the time-sensitive nature and Jared's opinion after thoughtful consideration that the proposal as presented is generally in alignment with some of the criteria put forth in the draft public art policy.
Thank you, Ryan. That was incredibly thorough. I
Is that great?
second it.
My dad was an attorney.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Temporary art is approved.
Thank you.
Big Four Rail Trail widening.
All right, as you've had a chance to enjoy the rail trail, so the project is, let's say, in the 85 to 90% complete percentile. There's just some punch list work that's outstanding. So part of that was time sensitive. So seeding in the winter didn't necessarily yield a large amount of coverage. So that will be something they will have to do. But concerning the asphalt and the majority of the project, that is complete. So both Tricia, as our construction administrator, and myself feel confident in providing this certificate of substantial completion with the assumption and understanding that there still is retainage that we are withholding at this time, and there is a punch list created for outstanding work.
Do you need a motion or anything?
To allow John to execute that substantial completion certificate would be for your consideration.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All opposed, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Carries. All right, other board-related items.
I do have one other board-related item, sorry all. So if you've had a chance to drive by Mulberry Fields, you'll notice that Shelter A was impacted by a vehicle and has been safety barricaded off because it is not safe to be within that structure. Working with insurances, we are working through that process to get that made whole. There is the opportunity that we will incur some costs in the interim, and those invoices would be directed towards the town, at which point we would settle with the insurance providers. So with your consideration, I would like to authorize up to $20,000 from our Fund 103 improvements line to fund the repair of the Shelter A at Mulberry Fields, with the understanding that we fully anticipate to be made whole financially and with the asset through the insurance process.
What's the timeline for that work?
2 weeks. So that was encouraging to hear, especially since we're anticipating the eclipse in April. So we'd really like to get that made whole. And this has kind of been the hang up, but fortunately we had a meeting tonight, so other board related items. We've been waiting on quotes for the work.
And it's not a total loss, right? It's a repair.
It's a repair. We are still procuring that second bid. This is just a sized project that's very hard to find somebody that wants to do this type of work, so we're working through that process. But we can safely assume that it'll be under $20,000. And again,
That was my second question. How confident are you that that's a sufficient amount of money?
yeah, to my understanding, unless there was some catastrophic event that was uncovered, but there are parts that are salvageable, so it is more of a repair rather than total replacement.
So do we have a motion to allow Jared to move forward on the shelter repairs at Mulberry Fields not to exceed $20,000?
So move.
We have a second?
Second.
We'll do a roll call on this one. Ryan Cambridge,
Aye.
Michael Kaufman,
Aye.
Kimberly Lane,
Aye.
Matt Milburn,
Aye.
Chad Dilly,
Aye.
and I say aye as well too. Motion carries. One other just item, just real quick. I just want, I know I sent an email about getting your town emails. Did you guys reach out and get that all worked out and set? I never got a response from, but I just want to make sure everyone's,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
I didn't see your email, but I did get my email set up.
Okay, perfect.
It looks like I think there's some training, but
I'm getting them, but I think people are still getting bounce backs from me. Is Jared, are you still getting bounce backs from me?
I am, but if you're getting that, but it's something about your mail forwarding.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
What'd you say?
I think there was some notice from the town about some
Oh, yes, yeah,
mandatory IT training.
Yeah, there's some
or
IT
something.
training that we need to do.
Just knock it out. And
yeah.
get it done.
It's just about getting caught in spam or scammed. So,
Can I add one last thing before we adjourn?
Mhm.
I really want to make sure that we go, well, fortunately, I'm not going to be here next month, so I don't have to deal with this golf.
Strategic.
But I do think it would be wise, I think, just, and this isn't, we don't make this decision right now, but to have a brief discussion as a board as far as the process that we want to, I mean, I'm assuming there is a public comment process, but like, I feel like this is the kind of thing that could go on for a while. And how we make our decision, and I want to be thoughtful of this. I mean, this is my first contentious issue, but I could imagine, I know people are passionate about this type of stuff, so does that make sense? I guess what I mean, I don't have a recommendation necessarily, other than to say, I would love to know from staff in the past, how has this been managed, what has worked, is there things that we should be doing proactively to consider how we're hearing things in a calm, orderly fashion, and giving people their time, but also respecting the fact that we don't have all the time in the world to hear everyone. Is that what's that process look like?
I think we would mirror what town council's doing. So since this isn't going to be a public hearing, we would welcome those comments at the beginning during the public comment section. We could limit those to 3 minutes per participant. Those need to be submitted prior to the meeting, and all of that would be followed. That process would be followed, and we would announce that through our communication channels of how residents can be a part of that process, either writing in or in person.
And they wouldn't have to, if they wanted to speak in person, they wouldn't have to submit comments in advance. They
Correct.
would just have to essentially
Sign
notify and
us
sign
that-
up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we should allow anyone and everyone that wants to voice an opinion, but I think we should have a framework in place that structures how that's done. And
I just want to be aware going in.
yeah,
what
and I
that
think
looks
just
like.
following town council's.
Is there a time limit for that? I mean, it's 3 minutes
3 minutes.
per, but how many 3 minutes? Like, could they go on
Well,
forever, or
I think
is there a limit?
I think that would have to be equitable to whoever showed up. So 31,000 residents would be our max.
I think it,
You're ordering pizza for us, like,
Jared, I've got a question just about the monthly financials. Do you have it to where, because we see the transactions, do you have it like year to date where we thought we'd be versus where we're at?
See, that's how, so I can provide, once the 2023 fiscal year closes out, which should be the month of February, I'll be able to provide the year-to-date versus the total amount.
Okay.
But the misconception that we should know exactly where we are in a budget is kind of ambiguous, because there are certain fees that we can always anticipate, like our outhouses have a certain rental fee, but there are other things that we either budgeted for specifically that year, or there's just changes in maintenance needs that are going to deviate expectations. But you can, with the report I will be able to provide, you could at least see we have 60% of this line that he's asking from still, and things like that.
Thank you.
So with that, has everyone had a chance to review the claims? Anyone have any questions or concerns?
Can I ask one question? And I normally don't, I leave this part alone, but is it routine for us to provide work shoes for our staff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that, I mean, I don't work in this field, so.
Yeah.
Is that
Specifically for our maintenance staff, we consider that a form of PPE, so protecting your feet is
Okay.
pretty crucial to your longevity in this field.
That's enough said. I just,
Of
in
course.
that
Yeah.
context, yes, but otherwise I need some new shoes.
Yeah. They go through them too.
Yes.
They exceed
Absolutely.
that
No.
each year.
We have a motion to approve the claims as presented.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Claims approved. So do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. See you next month.
All right.
I know.